So, what are the things that you learned that you wish someone had really expressed to you early on?
Uh, don't be afraid of opportunity when it presents itself, and don't try not to think too. Try not to overthink the opportunity. Quick example. I visited a friend in Sweden, and his father offered me a job to work with the Swedish railroad. And I was so astonished by the time the train door closed to leave the station, it was too late. I couldn't go back.
Cool. I'm going to back up a little bit. Who are you?
Uh, I'm Eric Livingston. I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, to Dorothy Miller Livingston and to Fred, or Frederick, not that I like that name, Livingston, who were compatible enough to stay married for their natural lives, and had 3 children who were, to the outside world, for all intents and purposes, very lovely children, and to the siblings internally, an irritation to each other, but pleasantly so.
You've traveled and lived many places. Give me the quick thumbnail of where you've lived and where you ended up and the various careers that you've had in 30 seconds.
Bullet points. Lived on a lake ore carrier for a season for Bethlehem Steel. Israel on Kibbutz Evron for a year. Traveled a bit of Europe after that. Worked for Erie Ceramic Arts. Put myself through school. Finally moved away to Stamford, Connecticut, where I worked briefly as a assistant development director to a regional theater. Substitute taught. Went into stock brokerage in Stamford and moved to Hartford with Charles Schwab and Company, who kindly helped me move out to Seattle, Washington. After a couple of years, decided I needed to check another opportunity out or pursue something out. Wound up in South Korea teaching conversational English. Came back to the United States, moved to DeSmet, South Dakota with my then partner, Cora Kenton. Became a bartender, interested in culinary arts. Moved to Mitchell, South Dakota. From there, went to Hyde Park Culinary Institute of America. Halfway through the program, I went to Dallas, Texas to stay with my brother for 5.5 months. Worked at the Adolphus Hotel in their banquet department, their grill room, and a couple of nights in their high-end French restaurant. Went back to finish the program because that's what you had to do. This is an internship. To finish up the degree, at the beginning of which I had to suddenly go back to South Dakota because Cora was in the final phases of her terminal illness of colon cancer. Went back to school. The school was very gracious in getting me, allowing me to go and come back the way I did. During the last semester there, met my current wife, Eliza Saunders. Together we moved back to Seattle, and we've been there for the past 16.5 years, where I've gone through a series of restaurants, went up to the North Slope to be a baker, went out to Wyoming to be a baker cook for Roughnecks, helped manage a large multi-million-dollar chain of restaurants in Seattle, family-owned chain. After a while, the process of being a chef became very physically debilitating, and have since become a tech writer, graphic designer, web designer, content writer, and have pursued many curiosities or things that I found curious, i.e. linguistics, how linguistics relate to various aspects of our lives, not just jargon, but how things get developed in language, or how they decay in language, or language decays of non-use. Currently, I find myself to be fascinated with municipal government and its functioning or lack thereof. That went more than 30 seconds. I apologize.
That's okay. It was a good one. What do you think of Erie? What do you like about Erie?
Oh dear, the knee-jerk reaction is what I like best about Erie is I don't live here. Um, that's really kind of negative, and I apologize. The plus side of Erie is that even though it has its peculiar provincial attitude in a way, it's that the same, curiously enough, the same things about Erie that make me knee-jerk reaction saying I'm glad I don't live here are in fact actually the best parts about it.
What are they?
This isn't going to make a lot of sense, and I apologize, but if all the cities I've lived in, this is perhaps the one city that is consistently the most true to itself, in the sense that it doesn't expect itself to be world class. It doesn't expect itself to disappear or become extinct. It continually functions on a I'm sorry this is so hard for me to try and figure out as I go. It, in some ways, has no expectations of making itself. It has no pretense. It's not pretending to be something it isn't. It's not a Cleveland. It's not a Pittsburgh. It's not trying to locate a new professional NBA team or become a NHL hockey center of some sort. But it expects to contribute to that level at some point, but if it doesn't, it's perfectly satisfied with itself. In other words, the citizens that remain here don't denigrate the city for what it is, nor do they expect to change to what it refuses to be, what it isn't.
Cool.
And yet it does try to improve itself. It doesn't expect to become a world-class city. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't explore avenues of improvement.
Does it provide a continuity for you as you come back over the years?
Continuity.
Because it doesn't change that quickly, do you find any enjoyment in the familiarity of coming back, and is there a grounding for you in coming back to Erie, or is Erie just a place?
Yes and no. I come back to Erie and I find myself satisfied that while it isn't stuck in amber per se, that it has I guess I find sometimes when I drive around, say like East 6th Street, I find many of the homes which when I was a child were seemingly fresh and the trees were proper and everything else. Now I come back and the trees are much larger, they haven't been maintained, the homes look tired, the streets aren't quite, well, they never really were, the potholes were always there. Which in a way saddens me. Things like hammer mill paper, which is, every time I go by I look at it and it strikes me, it's like God just scraped it off the planet and all this layer of dirt there, it saddens me. On the other side, there doesn't seem to be a kind of desperate disappointment about the city, and that, I guess, could be a way of saying I'm grounded here. And then I get to spend time with friends I've known since I was 8, 9, 10, even a couple since I was 5. And I can honestly say that I thank God that I've had those friends, and I do spend the time. I make the time, as little as time as I spend here, to catch up with them. In a way, I'm a poor communicator in the sense that I don't maintain a high level of communication when I'm not in Erie. But I'm glad that I've maintained and treasure, really, both emotionally and personally, the kind of friendship.
So you've taken Edmonds, Washington as your home, and you've not only adopted it, but you're now on a roll in terms of trying to affect change within the community.
I'm trying to affect change, and I'm trying to get the right set of eyeglass wear, if you will, to kind of, adjust my vision, getting to connect the dots. Who does what in the city? How does he put things together, or she? The one consistent complaint that I've heard about the citizenry of Edmonds is that everybody seemingly wants Edmonds to be stuck in amber, and some of the people, some of the civic leaders, really don't want to happen. They want to see change. Unfortunately, my role is I've started a ball rolling down the hill, and somehow I've gotten myself stuck on this ball, is that it isn't the change. The change is desirable, but the nature and the choices about the change, I find, haven't been thought through carefully. Their expectations of what the end results will be, and the collateral damage is the only way I can think of it, or what is going to happen, what are the downside versus the upside. Everybody talks about the upside. That's fine. They're trying to generate support, make it happen. Every time I go through and do the research on the 2 or 3 projects that I've started on, and this has only since been in the past 4 months, whatever the cons are on the project, they show up in the early documentation, but each edition of the documentation that I find, more and more of the downside of the project just disappears.
I'm going to take you off of this. What was Edmond, or Seattle, or any of the other places that you've lived around the world offer that people from Erie, people within Erie, should look to try to learn from, replicate?
Let me start with the first true big adventure, which was living a year on the kibbutz. A kibbutz is a commune. Loosely, I guess the word is a commune. The philosophy is communistic in that sense, but not as Marxist as, from each to each his own, from each the talent to each own need, sort of thing. And the level of democracy is more, how should we say, Jeffersonian, in the sense that it functions less than our democracy. But whatever change is affected on the kibbutz, the effect is focused on the benefit for all, whereas in some of the other places, such as Edmonds, which is the most current one, the change affected isn't necessarily for the betterment of all. And maybe my initial overreaction might be that I see the change being affected as beneficial for the too few. Some of the other places, like DeSmet, South Dakota, is very happy being stuck in amber. And in a weird way, that's how they see their function in life. It's famous for being one of the homes that Laura Ingalls Wilder lived in, but they don't really pursue any tourist benefit from it, and they don't really seem to care about it. In other words, it is what it is.
Right. So let me go back to my question. Focus on any of those communities and tell me what you observed, what you experienced, that you wish your friends back here would implement,
Ah,
or you would encourage your friends back here to implement.
I would like. Okay, some of my friends, let's stay with the simplest part of the question. Some of my friends, I would like them to experience outside of Erie some of the ideas, the newer, not newer ideas, but some of the different types of solutions to problems that other cities, similar to Erie, different than Erie, created for themselves.
Give me an example.
Dear me.
Okay, that's right. If it was going to come, it was going to come. You can think on that one. We can have a Google Hangout video conversation down the road, and you can answer that question for me.
Okay, you might want to write that one down.
It's the only one I'm going to leave you to take with
Let
you.
me give you perhaps a more specific example of a childhood, a lifelong friend, whom I truly dearly love and really wish him the best, and unfortunately he's going down his health. Kevin Coleman, to be precise. And an individual of extraordinary shyness has never really desired to explore the world outside of Erie. Physically explore the world outside of Erie. An unusual aspect to his personality is, and since he was 6 years old, he has constantly followed the world much larger than I've ever explored via shortwave radio. He's listened, he's understanding some of the issues that go on, and in many respects, far more sophisticated in his opinions than people who have traveled much more widely than myself. Yet he hasn't had the physical, put your hands on type of some of the experiences that I've had. Sadly, he'll never go to, say, Berlin to see the bust of Queen Nefertiti, which I am dearly in love with. Just one of the most amazing pieces of artwork I have ever seen, bar none. Or even some of the smaller places around Israel, for example, that are to me very, very dear and a very large part of my thinking of past experiences and how I've collected them. I'm positively thrilled that I spent that kind of time, but there's no way that I could share that delight with him because of his own personal quirk, which I have learned not to push for him.
Okay?
That would be a most specific example I can give.
All right. Let's go in a different direction. If somebody wanted to pursue a food career, become a chef, what advice do you have for them?
I wrote an essay on this, and basically the lead of it was, "Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be chefs." There's, like any particular career, particularly more so, I suspect, with chefdom, there's ups and downs. Being a chef allows you perhaps an inordinately high level of creativity, largely in part because it's a performance art. It's also a service art. You really have to spend enormous amounts of time and energy thinking about how to serve your audience, i.e. the diner. And this is for any level of restaurant, whether it's a beanery, a red sauce house, however you want to call it, a cafe, diner. And there's huge variances in diners, for example. You know, the place where you get a steak and eggs if you want, or scrambled eggs and home fries. However, you know, yeah, everybody thinks it's kind of a sameness everywhere, but there isn't. There are vast differences. Even to the very high end, you know, $100 a meal per individual, where the chef has spent eons of hours trying to figure out how not only the food should taste, thinking it through, and its final presentation. And in one of my studies, particularly with linguistics, one of the papers I read, which turned out to be a cure for insomnia, but the last 7 pages having to do with wine tasting and the language developing around it, there was one sentence where the author says, the culinary arts is the only art form and practice in which the actual artwork is destroyed to complete the entirety of its appreciation.
So if somebody is...
And that's the true joy of that, because if you get to that level, it is possibly one of the most satisfying efforts anybody will ever achieve.
It's one of the shortest lived pieces of art that is consistently created throughout the world.
Let me quote Julia Childs, partially. The answer to your question is yes, but the next day you get to do it all over again and better.
So if someone thinks that they want to become a chef, what steps do you recommend? Should they go to a culinary school? Should they just sit in their kitchen and practice? Should they go to college? Should they get a PhD? What should they do? If you saw somebody who was in high school and they said, I think I want to be a chef, Uncle Eric, what are my steps?
The first step would be to go and work at a restaurant. First off, you have to make a serious choice whether you want to be what they say front of the house, i.e. being a wait staff, a busboy, something, or back of the house, really in the kitchen where you work and be sweaty most of the day. Make that choice, or work at a restaurant. It doesn't have to be a high-end white tablecloth, but certainly a sit-down restaurant, and spend 5 or 6 months and experiencing it and learning if it is in fact a actual personality fit. If you are an outgoing person, front of the house is going to be certainly very seductive. If you're really involved in how flavors are put together and nutrition and presentation, then yes, you're going to be drawn to the back of the house. Both sides have plus and minuses. Front of the house is far more lucrative financially than the back of the house, certainly, but both have enormous rewards for the effort that you put forth. If you've made the choice that that is genuinely the way you want to spend your creative energies and personality, then go to the culinary school, and as wide a variation as there are in restaurants, there's wide a variation in culinary schools. Do your research well.
How does a person decide what culinary school is appropriate for them?
Well, what did it for me particularly is that as I was watching cooking shows on National Public Radio and other things, it became very easily apparent to me that most of the chefs that were presented were Culinary Institute of America graduates, CIA. So consequently, it made perfect sense for me to go, as they billed themselves at the time, the Harvard of culinary schools. That is not as truthful today, perhaps, as it was 15 years ago, as greater competition has developed, because America is becoming is developing a high awareness of what it eats, both good and bad, so that places like Johnson & Wales actually now offers a 4-year degree, not only of culinary art, which is basically a 2-year portion of that 4-year degree, but the business of restaurant management is attached to it. Same thing with the CIA. There are a number of other smaller institutions which are working very, very hard to catch up and offering similar things. The research part at this point would be what kind of chefs, or who are the chefs that are teaching those things? What have they been doing? It takes a greater effort to find out what will work for you. Of course, every situation is a little different. You know, finances, location, how far you're willing to travel, who's going to help you, how are you going to support yourself during these things? Are you live in a dorm? Whatever will play into it. But initially, the first thing is find out if it's right for you. Spend the time. Do you really want to work in the restaurant, or is one of my classmates really going through the CIA just to learn how the food is put together? But she claimed that she would never ever spend time in the kitchen or the front of the house because she had an accounting degree. She was going to sell herself as a restaurant accountant because she understood both sides of the ledger. So again, just being a culinarian, gourmet, whatever, doesn't limit you strictly to a food service situation. As I explained earlier, my food career put me on the North Slope simply because wherever man goes, he's got to eat. Somebody has to prepare it. Think of the old westerns that you don't see so much on TV. The chuck wagon follows the cattle drive. They got to eat.
Is the food industry a good career for stability?
Knee-jerk reaction, probably not. No, your resume will wind up looking like, especially if you stay in the focus of restaurants, your resume will probably wind up looking like you can't hold a job, which is sad. There are people who will stay with one restaurant for 30 years or so, which is okay. The asterisk on that statement is that part of the problem with staying one spot for 30 years is you wind up possibly not staying with the line of creativity. You will wind up becoming stale but not being aware of it.
Is the restaurant industry, I'm focusing obviously still on someone's desire to become a chef, but you can expand off that, is it a lucrative career to have? Is it a financially stable career, and is it a lucrative career?
Yes and no. Be aware, if this is your choice, be aware that the initial financing, or the money reward that you'll get will be fairly limited. You'll wind up getting your first job somewhere, especially in the back of the house, between $8 to $12 an hour. Even as a sous chef, maybe 12 and a half, 13 bucks an hour. Executive chefs with experience between 30 and 40,000 generally. The answer to the question basically is, how hard are you willing to work and truly put your body on the line? Because this is either side of the house, either side of the window where you place the food after you get done making it, has an enormous physical impact. Both sides, similar. Hips, ankles, wrists, carpal tunnel syndrome. You're standing for anywhere between 8 to 16 hours a day, especially if you're in the catering type of food service. It's harsh in that respect. As to, financials, again, the effort. Really know yourself as to what you want to do. I was at the CIA at the same time a now celebrity chef by the name of Kat Cora was. We started the whole thing together. She remembers me from a couple of emails we've passed together, so I know she does remember me. But she spent 15 years working day and night like a dog, making herself to become a celebrity chef. She did her own marketing in terms of getting herself hired to, for example, cruise ships where she would give classes. She is gay, and so she made herself market specific about gay cruises, gay what's the word I want? Spas? No, not spas. Resorts, things like that. And she made herself known. She made the connections. She comes from a restaurant family, so there was already some connections put together. She made herself work for other celebrity chefs, other known restaurants, well-known restaurants. Larry Forgione, Sue Goldstein, in New York City. She put her face in front of them consistently, so they began to know her, trust her, put her in positions of management. Watched how she, and she worked, like I said, night and day, like a dog, to make it work for her, and it has paid off handsomely. Doesn't hurt to be photogenic either. She's very good for the camera. The camera's very good for her. But she also has learned what the public will accept in terms of what she can present to them. And she's chosen her small niche for that even. There are some celebrity chefs who are very, very sophisticated and find it very difficult to teach. They can present well, but they don't necessarily teach well. Kat Cora teaches better than she presents. With reservation, this is subjective of opinion. Any kind of thing is going to be subjective when this is presented. Some of her recipes are, I think, not up to her capabilities. But remember, she's marketing herself.
What you're saying is that if a person is an entrepreneur, if they approach their career as an entrepreneur, where everyone is their customer, and they have to have a plan, whether they know what that plan is up front or not, they understand that they are marketing themselves at all times, that they are looking for a niche.
With every breath. With every breath. I remember her from the very first class, the very first day at the CIA. There would be no way that anybody would know that she had a plan. I mean, there's a 35-year-old woman with a master's in physical therapy, having spent a number of years in physical therapy, but from a restaurant family, chose to make herself a celebrity chef. None of us knew that she had this plan. But with a gap of some years and getting to see her for the very first time on the Food Network, presenting something with, I forget the gentleman's name, it hit me like a ton of bricks that she had that plan from that moment that I saw her in day one, class one. Precisely what she